Yeah, the ginger cats are crazy. I feel like I've been seeing this on Instagram where you have like Instagram is proposing me only cat videos recently, which I really like. And on lots of them, it's like it'll show a ginger cat doing something weird, and then people will be like, "Oh, ginger cat!" Like, it's like is this a thing? This is a thing, right?
Well,
people think they're extra.
We had a cat, a ginger cat, and he was pretty crazy. He was full on. He seemed to be like half feral, But of these two, the orange one we've got now and the black one, I think they're equally nuts.
Okay.
Yeah, he certainly doesn't stand out as being more crazy, being the orange one. Yeah, but that's limited cat experience.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. One sampling. Yeah, it's not very good.
No.
Right. Let's go back to what you were talking about with the
ancient civilization. Yeah. Okay. So I'll do a little bit of background on it all, and then get to the Sphinx and all these sort of things, because I think these people who have led this field in the last couple of years, people like Graham Hancock, Randall Carlson, some of the guys, John Anthony West in Egypt, some of the modern guard, like History from Granite, whose name I won't mention because I know he likes to keep a low profile, AncientX and Ben from AncientX, these people have put a lot of thought and effort into the theory. They're not crackpots.
Yeah, I did say that.
At all. They're not.
Because,
yeah?
No, I mean, not that to say that they are, but it does sound like some maybe more crackpotty stuff from like 20 years ago, and people were talking about alien civilizations coming in and giving us all their technology.
I think there's been a lot of interest in let's focus to begin with on like ancient Egypt, because the pyramids, everyone loves the pyramids. There's been a lot of focus on that area, and so a lot of people have come up with a lot of theories over time, and there's definitely unknowns, and because we haven't had a clear understanding of where the pyramids came from, how old they are, or how they were built, then there's been lots of ideas thrown out about how it could be. The one that these guys are all talking about seems to be very compelling, is that there was a previous human civilization 12, 14,000 years ago, who knows how far back they went, that suffered a cataclysm and were effectively wiped out. And so when we see things like this, when we see things like the Sphinx, and some of the pyramids, and some of the megalithic stonework around the earth that's old from this period, it's 11,000 years old, or it's old, it gives us an indication that there was some evidence that there was this civilization that has been lost. But our modern archaeology, like the last 100 years, hasn't accepted that at all.
Right, okay. And what about fossilized?
Are there any too young to be fossils? Like from things from 12,000. This is 12,000 years ago, so not long enough to have really built fossils.
Right, I guess fossils is a kind of a crazy word. I meant
artifacts.
Yes, sure.
Human
remains.
So this is it's a good question, and I'm no expert in this field, but but if we can, we'll make some assumptions. So generally, humans, when they develop an area, they'll stay close to water. And staying close to the coast is often a good idea. I mean, you're living on the coast, sure. You've got the best of both worlds. You've got some land on this side, you can do some farming, you've got trees. Here you've got fish, and you've got water, and you've got the ability to travel easily, get just pushed around by the wind if you want to travel. So people tend to form in coastal regions, all around Europe, all around America. Coastal regions, there's lots of people there. So if there were a cataclysm which caused sea levels to rise dramatically and rapidly, like the stories in the Bible and thousands of other cultures, when they talk about the flood, they're not talking about, it rained for a few days and there was a couple of feet of water. No, they're talking about everything was washed away. And it was like there was rapid, and they talk about some weird things. They go massive flooding and fire. It's like, well, that's a weird thing. How do you get fire
volcanoes?
and flooding? Possibly some volcanoes, possibly comets, fragments of comets hitting the ground. Like, you see what a shooting star looks like. And then you see sometimes those ones where a comet comes in and it actually blows up and it lights up the nighttime into daytime. But imagine much bigger ones hitting the ground. They're going to make a massive fireball explosion. And so this is where you get this conflicting, unusual, hard to understand, what are called myths or story, that there's massive fire and flooding. It's like, okay, so if some of these comets hit the ground where there wasn't ice, big fireballs. Those that hit ice, and in the period of time we're talking 12,000-ish years ago, the top half of North America and Europe was just covered in 2 kilometres of ice.
Yep.
So when these comets come in, they're not hitting dirt, they're hitting ice. They're vaporizing, causing massive temperature. They're just throwing up into the atmosphere millions of tons of ice and water and melting, like vaporizing this, such that you've suddenly got an ice shelf just stopping rapidly. And we don't know exactly, we don't know how big the first impacts were or when the biggest one was. There's a 1,000-year period, which they call the Younger Dryas period. And this period of 1,000 years is where Earth's temperature was down here. Temperature was low. We're in a ice age. We were starting to come out of the ice age, and then suddenly we dropped right back into an ice age. And then 1,000 years go by, and then 1,000 years later, we jump out of this ice age. So they're like, well, that's weird. And so the theory around this, which I've probably got wrong, but basically is some comets came in and hit the ice shelf, threw up lots of ice and that into the atmosphere and cooled the planet. Because we're talking massive amounts. Like a volcano. There's been times in the past where a volcano, a big one, has erupted, and that's caused a winter or two. Like there was no summer because there was enough debris in the atmosphere to cool it for a while. This is well beyond that. And then 1,000 years later, let's say some more comet pieces hit, but these ones maybe hit into the oceans rather than the ice. And so perhaps threw steam up into the atmosphere, causing greenhouse conditions. And so we rise. Our temperature came up again, which could explain what has happened. So there seems to be good information that there was a impact, series of them. And then you go, okay, so you go back to like Egypt and some of the mysteries around Egypt, where we've got these massive stone pyramids. No one knows what they're for, but they seem to have a connection with the stars. So the Sphinx is a good one. So the Sphinx is a lion. If we align that with the astrology of Leo, where Leo is in the sky, if you go back to this period of 12,000 years ago, then at the spring equinox, the Sphinx looks directly at the constellation of Leo. Now, over time, the constellations move, and it's 22,000 years for a full cycle to go through all of them. So now the Sphinx doesn't look at Leo. It's because we've had 12,000 years, Leo has moved away. But if you roll back to when we think it may have been built, it was looking directly at the spring equinox at Leo, the constellation of Leo. So there's this feeling that it was built at a period of time a long time before when modern archaeology says it was.
Oh, right. I see what you're saying. So it would have been built when it was looking.
Yeah, it was.
Okay.
That's what they think. And one of the reasons, which adds to this, so the Sphinx is carved out of the bedrock. So the pyramids were made, the stones were cut and they were built.
Yeah.
The Sphinx is carved out of the bedrock that's there.
Oh, was it really?
Yeah. So
it's
one piece that got carved out.
Holy shit. Okay.
So it's in this, it's in a little, imagine you had a box and you carved down and you left the Sphinx there in the middle. So there's the Giza Plateau around here, and there's on the sides of the box where it's been cut down for the Sphinx to be, where they dug it out, there's water erosion on here. And it's serious, deep-looking water erosion. It looks as though lots of water has been running over here. Now, there hasn't been lots of water in Egypt
I see.
for a long time, for thousands and thousands of years, maybe about 10, 12,000 years. So there are these indicators that, okay, this stone looks as though it has been weathered by a lot of water. That didn't happen 4,000 years ago. That happened a long time ago. So there's that. Then there's the pyramids. The pyramids are amazing architecture in that they are like the big pyramid. I don't know, it's got something ridiculous. It's got 2 or 3 or more million blocks. And these blocks aren't the size of bricks. These blocks are the size of cars. Some of these things are like 70, 80 tons.
Oh, yeah. I remember learning about this when, like, in elementary school.
They're
They're saying it would take, like, multiple people to move one of them.
Yeah. They're monstrous. And this is all meant to have been built, say, 3,500, 4,000 years ago by a civilization that apparently had no understanding of the wheel. So they all had to be dragged.
They dragged them, yeah. That's what they said.
Dragged. And if you just work out, if you basically say that even if they took every block, these massive blocks, and they're crafted, they're not just rough cut and thrown in there. The pyramid itself as a structure is incredibly precise. Like, it aligns exactly with due north. The scale of it gives you a representation of the northern hemisphere of the Earth. Like the width of it, if you times the width of the base of the pyramid, you times it by a number which I think might be 22,700, which is this weird period of which the star signs, like that, as they move around the Earth. As the Earth moves around, takes it 22,700 years. So if you're looking at Leo, come back 22,007 years, you're looking at Leo again. You multiply that number by the base of the pyramid, you get like the diameter of the Earth. So they're pretty sure that whoever built the pyramids could tell and knew how big the Earth was. Now, we only figured that out like in the 1800s. We were actually able to really sort of figure out what the diameter of the Earth is. So there's this amazingly precise thing, and it's just precise in the way it's built. You know, the blocks are put together and you can't fit a piece of paper between them. It's precision engineering, which was meant to have been done, if we go back 4,000 years, by the Egyptians who had copper tools. And some of the blocks they're using are granite. Some of them are diorite. These are the hardest rocks we know. Like on the Mohs scale, these are like 8 and 9. Copper's just going to keep rubbing away. You can do it, but it's going to take a lot of time and effort. So if you're thinking about, you've got millions of blocks you've got to put to build one of these pyramids, even if you were to place one block every 5 minutes without fail and get it right and have no problem, the time it takes to build that pyramid is years and years and years. And it's unlikely that they were built in the time which modern archaeology says it. You know, it says this pyramid took it 25 years to build. It's like, there's no way it took
like millions of slaves and something, right?
Yeah. This thing didn't take 25 years. This maybe took 200 years to build, realistically, to position all those things. So that's a challenge, the amount of time that's meant to have taken them. But the precision of them, they are some of the oldest, what they believe is the oldest stonework in Egypt. And you have to see, I mean, I want to go to the Museum of Egypt in Cairo and see some of these with my own eyes, but just looking at them on video, the workmanship in some of these statues is incredible. Like there are pictures of seated, someone seated like this, or there might be a standing family where there's 3 people, and the stone is hard and it is polished perfectly. It's done to such a level that on some of them, they have the undulations of the ribs here in the chest. It's just phenomenal, but they're completely symmetrical. It's not like you've imagined Michelangelo's is it David? Where it's carved out of marble, and it's like it's just beautifully muscled and veins and that sort of thing. But it's perfectly human. Like there's imperfections. The face isn't symmetrical. Yeah. Not all, but a lot of these Egyptian ones, all the faces are exactly the same. And they're exactly the same when we're talking about statues that are 3 stories high and there's 6 of them and their faces are all perfectly identical. You go and measure every one of them. They're all perfectly identical. They just didn't have the ability to do that 4,000 years ago. but they're there. And what seems to have happened, again, as we're saying, there's a whole heap of pharaohs from 4,000, 3,500 years ago who were basically like the most gross graffiti artists who found all these amazing things and said, oh, well, I'll claim it as mine. And so they get someone to chisel their name into it. One of them is a Sphinx. It's in the museum. And it is it's a black granite piece of stone. It's beautiful. It looks like a real lion's body. Like you can see the undulations of the ribs in this shining black stone. It's incredible. And then on the shoulder, it's carved in whoever the pharaoh's name is. And honestly, you look at the carving and it's like chicken scratching.
Yeah.
And it's like, but what has happened? The original modern Egyptologists have said, oh, well, that's whoever it is, Khafre or whoever it is. Well, that was carved in his time, and he was 3,500 years ago, so that's a 3,500-year-old statue. It's like, no, that statue is way older than that, and he's just carved his name into it, the bastard.
So something that I find confusing about this whole theory, which I'm just learning about now, is like I thought that a lot of these civilizations were supposed to be developing at like the same time-ish, like is that right? The Egyptian ones and the South American ones. So wouldn't it take like somebody a super long time to get from one to the other to communicate this information?
Maybe. Well, so yeah, you would think so. But here's a couple of interesting things. This is really interesting. I'd like to get a copy of this and stick it on the wall. There's a map called the Peri-Reis map. And the Peri-Reis map was formed, I think this was in the 1500s. It was put together by, I think it's a Portuguese guy, Peri-Reis was an admiral or something, put the map together, and in his notes, it was formed by him looking at a number of source maps, which I think they may have been lost now, but we've got the Peri-Reis map. And there's a couple of maps like this from 500 years ago. So some of them show Antarctica. But they show the landmass of Antarctica. And now Antarctica has been under ice for a long time. But in the 60s, I think it was, the American Navy were out surveying through the ice in Antarctica, and they're surveying to see where the land is. And so someone who was researching the Peri-Reis map sent it to the admiral who was doing the survey and said, could you please compare this? We've got this map, it's an old map, and it seems to show Antarctica. Could you look at this map and compare it to your survey notes and tell us if they line up? And there's a letter, it's a famous letter, comes back from the admiral and says, it's not often we see something like this, but we have taken the time to compare your map that you've provided to us by Peri-Reis with the data we have, and our conclusion is that the alignment between this map and the coastline under the ice of Antarctica is incredibly accurate, and we would have no other option but to say that, yes, this is a map of Antarctica.
Oh, wow.
Now,
okay.
So what this seems to be saying is, I think Antarctica has been under ice for 14,000, 20,000 years. So there's some indication that 20,000, 14,000 years ago, someone was mapping Antarctica, had before the ice was there, and had recorded it, and it's been passed on through time. So there's that. It seems like there were people that have travelled the world well before we could. We as our modern civilization, let's say that the last 10,000 years, it was only in the 1800s that we were able to actually draw maps accurately, because we could figure out latitude, but we couldn't figure out longitude, and so our maps were off.
That's right. Yeah, they all look a bit wonky.
Yeah. But these maps, these old maps, their longitude seems to be pretty much in order. So it seems as though at some previous time, people had figured out how to measure longitude. So these things give an indication, like they're like these footprints or fingerprints that, well, the way that we would have done that is we would have had to understand longitude, and they seem to have done it. So we guess they understood longitude, and they seem to align their massive stone temples with due north and with stars, so they understood astrology. So it seems as though there was this cataclysm, comets, fragments of a comet impacting with the Earth, and even this bears out now by science. So as this is the sun, and as the Earth is orbiting, as we go around on a year, as we go around the sun, there is a belt of debris called the toroid meteor stream. And so twice a year, this is the sun, as the Earth goes around, it's sort of going out up and down a bit as it's going around. Twice a year, we go through the toroid meteor stream, and that gives us the big meteor showers twice a year, in October and July, whenever it is. So the toroid meteor stream has still got some big chunks in there. If we were to come across and hit them, we'd have some problems. And so it's entirely possible that in the past, as we were going through there, we hit some big chunks, and that's what blew up this ice. So let's just assume then that we did have a civilization, mostly living on the coast, around wherever they were living, in America and Europe, wherever they were living. Comet impact hits, massive sea level rise, and we're talking about a massively sea level rise within perhaps hours or days.
Yeah.
Catastrophic. The tales that are told of the flood myth are not happy tales. They're just death, destruction, flooding, everyone gone, fireballs, hell on earth. Some people survive, but not everyone does. And most of the area, again, so this is where we start to get into what sounds really fringe. Atlantis. I know Atlantis just made up. Yeah, except that. So there's a story from, I think it's Plato, Greek philosopher. I think it's Plato talking to someone about Atlantis. And this is about the only recorded, I think, documented story we've got that gives an age for Atlantis. But this was 2,000 years ago that Plato was talking. I've got this. I'll sound like an idiot. But he was talking to whoever it was that he was talking to from Egypt, let's say, and they were talking about Atlantis. And he said, well, when did that happen, that it was lost? And they said 9,000 years ago. So, because he was 2,000 years ago, his 9,000 years ago is our 11,600 years ago, which just lines up with when this stuff was happening. So it's actually plausible that maybe there was an Atlantis, which was a hub of civilization on the coast, because it's a great place to live, and it just got washed away and submerged. So you've had this happen. All these people have died, but some have survived with knowledge. And we don't know what level of civilization or technology they had. But if we were to imagine it, like we were saying before, if we were to imagine it today, if that happened today, 100-metre sea rise immediately, all the major cities around the world are gone, but some people would survive. But their power grids would be gone. Medical infrastructure would be gone. Roads and things would be destroyed. Air travel would be gone. No GPS anymore. Lots of people would be dead. We would lose some of that. Like maybe the fact we could no longer control the satellites. We lose GPS and that sort of.
Oh yeah, for sure.
All of that happens. But some people survive and are able to maintain some level of information. They get together. Shit, it's back to hard farming for some people, but we can kind of survive. And we want to try to proceed and go ahead. So what do? Well, maybe over a period of time, we keep the knowledge that we have got. We try and keep some of the stories that we have got. We maybe can even do something like we can continue to generate electricity on a small scale and have some computers that can do some work for us. And then we go, well, we need to form an organisation or a school or a university where we can start to spread the knowledge again. Now, maybe some boats had survived. We had some skills. We knew how to build boats. We've still got the skills. Yeah. So we get some people, we get them together basically like a university, and we collate our knowledge. This is how you do agriculture. This is how the sun works. This is how seeds work and what seeds you should plant at this time to grow basic crops. This is how mathematics works. And we go out across the planet because we knew how to travel across the planet before. We can perhaps still do that. Maybe we still have our maps. This is 11,000 years ago. And so we go out and we gather the people, the survivors, and say, come together and we will show you how to plant crops. Because lots of people wouldn't have known, and we'll show you how mathematics works and we'll give you a language and this kind of thing. And so those people who went out to these areas, it's entirely possible that they would be like the Freemasons, or they would be lecturers at a university. The old school, they have robes and that sort of thing. They may have had a uniform, because they may have been an organisation.
Maybe.
Because which then plays into the fact that in the stone carvings we see from around the world, there are these similarities. There's lots of the Apukali and Quetzalcoatl. There are these guys, women, people, And when they're carved into stone, they have some weird outfits, but there's similarities. Like some of them they've got fish heads and bird heads on human bodies, and they're carrying the handbags. Now, the handbag might just be a representation of knowledge. You know?
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, like we can imagine if you were traveling somewhere, you've lost all the infrastructure. Imagine being back to traveling on a wooden boat, you know, to get to another continent to go and teach people. You've lost all electricity. When you get there, there's nothing but some people scratching out a living. You know, what are you going to? You're probably going to carry a bag with paper in it with your knowledge, and this is where you're going to sit down and go, okay, this is the tables for agriculture. This is mathematics. We'll teach you numbers again, and all that sort of thing. So, I think it's a really plausible tale.
It does sound super plausible.
Yeah.
I wonder, like, so presumably they're searching for evidence, right? I wonder what they're looking for, like archaeology or
underwater is where they're starting to look. Yeah, because when the sea levels rose, everything was on the coast, and now it's under 200 meters of water, and they're starting to find things like that.
So they're like physically searching somewhere right now?
They're starting, yes. People,
do you know where?
People, well, just I think around, a lot of it's done around Indonesia, because they think that there was a lot of people living on what was Sundaland, which is now underwater. But even there, Japan, there's lots of areas where they're starting to, even like Greek areas, that you go out into the water, and once you get out a little bit, even if India, they're finding stone structures and things.
Oh, they must, yeah.
And they're like,
Greece, yeah.
Oh, okay. When was that land there on the shoreline? 100 meters or 400 feet ago. Oh, when did that happen? Oh, about 12,000 years ago.
Yeah.
So this is all playing to the fact that, people were living on the coast. There was cataclysms. Looking for things. So this is a good question. I don't know how much stuff would be left from 12,000 years ago. And I'll give you this is a real simple example from when I was a kid. I used to go to my friend's farm, and this would have been about when I was 10 years old, I suppose, which would have been in the early 80s. There were cars in the paddocks there. Now, these were old cars, and when I say old, they would have been like 1940s or 50s style of cars. So when those cars were there, the very oldest they could have been, let's say came from the 50s, the very oldest these cars could have been would have been 33 years about.
Okay.
Because they were old curved shaped things like that, Maybe give them another 10 years. So they were 45 years old. Maximum. That's all they could be, because they weren't 60 styles cars. They weren't Model T Fords. There was barely anything left of them. They had just rusted away to such an extent that there was bits of the shell and the body and still there, but they were in a terrible state of disrepair. Yeah. So that was after 50 years. So if you give them another 50 years, there's 1,000 years, and then you do 10 more lots of that 1,000 years, there's going to be nothing left of them.
Well, I mean, the cars weren't built to last, right?
No.
If there was something like the pyramids underwater, surely some of that's still around, yeah.
There is.
And what's hilarious is that first there's this fantastic story about like new origins and all this stuff, and now you're combining it with treasure hunting under the sea, which is like the other
gonna make a great movie, isn't it?
Exciting thing, yeah.
But
I'm more excited to see the movie now.
But this is a good point. It's you have this fantastic story, which is a great story, but then the fact that you can start to back it up with old rocks and things around the world, and yes, underwater
it makes it way more fascinating.
Well, it's compelling, because it's like, okay, if you were to have this story, well, then there would be rock structures under the ground. Yes, we're starting to find them. Okay, so that's lining up with the story. That's backing it up. But like, if you imagine what we have in our civilization today, what would exist after 1,000 years of just complete disrepair, just everything stopped, or worse, if most of it was just underwater? Anything metallic is just effectively
it's gone, yeah.
It's going to rot away. Anything wooden, anything paper, all that's gone, which is, so when we go
they all are trash, right? And stuff that we've dug.
Well, yeah, look, mate, plastic, but even give 10,000 years, there wouldn't be a whole heap of plastic left. I'm sure there would be some. But
so nuclear waste then, maybe?
Nuclear waste, yeah.
Maybe?
Nuclear waste is Okay, so this is going to lead me down another stream now, which I've just been getting into recently. This is really interesting. So I don't know if you're religious or not, but there is some good information now that the Bible and the Torah, where in the Bible and the Torah the word God has been inserted, it shouldn't have been, because from the original texts that were translated from ancient Hebrew, that were translated, the word in these texts that's been turned into God doesn't equal God. It's another word, and it's a word that there's no direct translation for.
Okay.
So there's a man whose name I wish I could remember to give him credit for this now, but anyhow, who was asked to do some translation of the ancient texts for the Vatican, and he was contracted to do a literal translation. And so he did. But when he got to some of these words in here, like Yahweh, which is like a Hebrew word for which has become like God.
Yeah, I thought it was for God.
Yeah. Yahweh does not mean God. So it's a word which he said he would leave it as Yahweh, because it doesn't translate to God. And there are a number of other words in there which are translated, but when you look at the context of them, they seem to indicate that maybe they were technology of some sort. The Ark is one. The Ark of the Covenant is a really interesting one. The talk about it is that it had to be sealed in a certain way, and when it was opened, those who looked upon it were infested with sores and died.
Yeah, the only thing I know about that is from Indiana Jones, so you can feel free to explain away. Yeah.
So, look, one interpretation of that could be that it sounds like radiation. People who came and looked upon the Ark were irradiated by it and died of horrible scores, and that you get from radiation burns. So there are these interesting, tantalizing bits and pieces in there.
That's a cool story. I mean, that's a cool idea as well.
Yeah. Well, there's another one. There's the Ruach, which is this Hebrew translation, and the Ruach is really weird. The Ruach sounds like it could be a jet. Like it talks about one of the god people being in it, and you cannot stand near it, and the flame as it rose up. Like it sounds like it could be a really convoluted translation of what could have been something like a jet, that kind of thing. So anyhow, where the Bible says God, what it seems to be is that it's not God. Instead, it's a person of power. And the Jewish actually aren't monotheistic. The Jewish don't believe that there was just one God. They believe that they had this one ruler, if we use the word ruler, over their peoples, but there were many other rulers. And there are stories back in these texts where they talk about their Yahweh warring with other ones. And what it almost sounds like is, if you were to imagine that there were people who had survived the cataclysm, had knowledge, had power, had some technology, going out to areas where there were people who didn't, you could imagine that person would be powerful. And if you were to write about them, it could almost be that they were godlike when you start to talk about the fact, well, maybe they could fly because they had a drone, or they had I don't know if a jet. I'm just saying. But they knew magic. They knew how to make water boil. They could use numbers to tell when the sun would go dark and all this sort of thing. They would be like a god. They would be powerful people. They would draw powerful people. It'd be easy for them to form a security team around them and an army if they wanted to, and they would command over a group of people. And it sounds like that's what's happened in the Bible. That type of ruler has become God. Was translated to God. So this is really interesting, because again, I think this sort of backs up the story of perhaps there being people with knowledge spreading out around the world. Some of them are good, some of them are bad. Some of them got the taste for power and became corrupted, because there's these other stories too, that the rulers, some of them weren't good. Like they're bad angels and this sort of thing, which could just quite possibly be, imagine a warlord. One's benevolent, looks after his people, other ones not, just abusing people and the power. It's really interesting.
Yeah, really interesting ideas, eh? I mean, those ones are, please send me stuff if you want.
I'll send you a link of this video where this guy who translated these old texts talks about this.
Yeah.
And it's very compelling where he's saying this isn't the word for God. It's something else.
Yeah, I mean, that's so tricky because it probably can never be proven one way or the other, right? But the other stuff, maybe one day we will find these like ruins or...
Oh, but they're finding them.
Yeah.
So Göbekli Tepe, Göbekli Tepe is one of those ruins that's 11,000 years old. And this is the site where massive stone T-shaped things with high relief carving. So they've basically got a big T-shaped block, 10 feet tall, 3 feet wide, a foot deep, and instead of on the side of it carving into it a picture, which would be easy, chiseling into it, no, they shaved off the whole side except for the bit they left in high relief there. And there's a lot of what appear to be like zodiac symbolism in there, like Scorpio and Sagittarius. And so this is Graham Hancock does a really good job of his theory and investigation of this. He believes that these people have been through a cataclysm. They lost everything. Paper's no good. How would you pass a message down through time and ensure it would be around? You'd make it out of stone. You'd make it big. You'd make it solid, because that might be the only thing that would survive. And so he believes that there's message in these stones in Göbekli Tepe. And part of what he thinks that it is trying to indicate to us is that we need to be aware. Now, this one's really stretching the bow, but this is interesting, that we need to be aware of the time when we're in the time of, like, at the end of Scorpio moving into Sagittarius, which is around 2030, interestingly enough. And he's thinking that they might be indicating to us that they think we're going to run into more problems in the toroid meteor stream, because we go through it twice a year. And I think there has even been some research done recently looking at the toroid meteor stream. And yeah, there are some big chunks there, and it's possible that we'll get close to some of them around 2030. So, I mean, 2030, we might be able to check this and find out and go, wow, we had a couple of near misses with some big pieces of rock, which would then add weight to the fact that these people did have a comet impact and they were trying to warn us, remember this, and we'll carve it in stone because, well, there is no internet. We've lost all of that. Books, we're just learning to make paper again, so that's not very good to us. But if we carve it in stone, it'll be around for a while. It's a super interesting topic.
Oh, man. And if that happens, we're super not ready, eh? Like...
No. And that's right. We're not. And people are trying to do stuff in that field now. They're trying to figure out how we could push. I had the kids. We watched it live a couple of months ago when they sent up a satellite, and from it, they ejected a second little satellite at an asteroid.
Okay.
To try to just move it off its course.
And did it work?
To test it. I think it did. I think because you got to see from the main satellite, this little one just heading towards it, and then pop, camera went off. But I think it did actually move. I've got a funny feeling it may even have moved it slightly more than they thought it would, or I might be making that up or getting confused with something else. But I guess depending on how far you are, you just need a tiny little push. Yeah.
To divert it. Is this NASA that did this?
I think
surely
it was.
Not.
I think it would have been NASA. I think this one would have been. But I think that's the only hope we've got of trying to address an asteroid or comet impact is to send something out to it early to move it. Not like in Armageddon, the film, and put a nuke on it and blow it up, because then we just sent thousands more coming at us.
Which are radioactive now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that was a good idea. So, yeah. I'll send you some links.
All right. Yeah, great.
I'll put them in the description of the video.
It sounds like you should have this guy on. It sounds like.
So this is a shout out to AncientX or History for Granite, whose name I now know, but I'll keep it on the down low, or Ben from AncientX. Any of those boys, if they see this, I'd absolutely love to talk to them. They're three of the most interesting people out there at the moment. Like History for Granite, his episodes on the pyramids are just so insightful.
Oh, this is a show. I thought it was a book. Sorry, I got confused.
No, he has that's the name of his channel on YouTube, History for Granite.
I see.
And he will look at a pyramid, and then we'll look at the common understanding of it, and then we'll go and analyze it. And honestly, he should be a detective, because he just has this incredible way of thinking through and looking at data that's there and forming a really strong hypothesis of what's going on, which seems to have been overlooked by others. And he'll just walk you through, this is why I think this.
Oh, so like a historian?
Look, I don't know. I don't know his background, right, but I get the feeling that he's amateur in that he's just interested. He has this interest. I don't know if he is an Egyptologist or something, or if he works with stone, but he just seems like he's interested in this and is able to, from information and from writings, to take another look at it and come up with very compelling stories for how things are different to what the original narrative might be. And then Annie XT and Ben from AncientX, they spent a whole heap of time over in Egypt doing tours and looking at things, and have done that for a number of years, and have really, really compelling theories that that go against the mainstream. Simple things like, the age of these pyramids are older, and who they say, the pharaoh they say that owns this, he doesn't own it. He just inscribed his name on it. And as I said, there's these really good examples of incredibly made statues with really bad hand-chiseled names on them, and yet that's been used to go, well, that's the period of that pharaoh, so he must have made the statue, when clearly he didn't. And the technology, and actually South America is a really good example of this, like what's attributed to be the Mayans in South America, or the Mayans, just isn't them. Like the work that's older than theirs is really high quality, and then that knowledge seems to have been lost. And then you see their repair work on walls where they've tried to reproduce, and even in Egypt you get the same thing, where there's this thing that were carved in this period of 3,000 or 4,000 years ago, and you can see that they're trying to be like some of the older examples they got, but they're just nowhere near the quality.
Yeah, kind of reminds me of today when we have these beautiful old buildings, and then we kind of just slap them.
Yeah.
Slap repairs on them. Very
much like that. And there's one more thing. There's this whole bunch of vases that were found under a pyramid. There's a lot of them, 38,000 of them. And they are carved, like they're curved with curved handles on them, and they're carved out of really hard granite. And they're perfectly symmetrical, like perfectly within like the width of a hair. And the common understanding or narrative of how they were carved was they were carved using copper chisels and diorite balls. So diorite is like a really, really hard rock ball, and they believe they got this granite and they just go bang, 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 and like over time smash off tiny bits. But they're perfectly polished. They look as though they have been put on a modern lathe, like a piece of stone put on a modern lathe, and with modern CNC and laser precision, that's how they were cut. And yet they're
cool.
They just can't figure out how they did them with a civilization that supposedly didn't have the wheel, and which may be true. Egypt 4,000 years ago, maybe they didn't have the wheel, but they didn't make these things. Someone before them made them. Not aliens, humans, but at a period of 10, 12,000 years ago, and that knowledge and technology was lost. That seems to be the big mystery.
God, history's so interesting. I don't really know anything about it either, so when I find stuff out.
You know as much as I know now on this topic.
All right.
But yeah. Hey, look, thank you for coming in.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Oh, thanks. It's so much fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. We should do it again sometime.
For sure. I'm excited to see your next episodes.
Okay, cool.
Wow, it's like timeless in here without the wind.